Welcome to another deep dive with us. This time, we're going deep on UAPs, those unidentified aerial phenomena. I've got this huge stack of research here, even some NASA footage, trying to get to what science actually says about these things.
It's a lot, isn't it? There's so many theories out there.
Oh, yeah. Definitely a lot to go through. But luckily, we've got you here to kind of walk us through this, help connect some of those dots.
Well, it looks like a lot of what you sent in leans toward that plasma hypothesis.
Right. Yeah, that 2024 paper by Joseph and all those guys really dives into it. The whole idea that a lot of these UAPs could be explained by plasmoids.
Uh-huh.
So before we get too far, can you just give us a super quick, what are plasmoids?
Plasmoids. Well, think of them kind of like glowing, pulsating balls of charged particles. They can hang out in space or even in our own atmosphere. And they can act in some pretty bizarre ways if you don't know what you're looking at.
Okay, so weird glowing balls. Got it. But how did those link to UAPs? Why are they such a good explanation?
Well, the research talks about plasmoids doing some pretty crazy stuff, like changing shape, multiplying, even crashing into each other. And some scientists think that might be more than just, like, basic physics happening.
Interesting. You mentioned something about a fourth domain of life earlier. What's that all about? Are scientists saying these things could be alive?
It's definitely a bold claim, but the research does point to some plasmoid behaviors that kind of break the mold of how we usually think about physics and electromagnetism. There was one study that suggests they can actually, follow things, even target them, like space shuttles.
No way.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So some scientists are starting to wonder if maybe they have some level of intelligence. Maybe even a whole different kind of life than we're used to.
That's crazy. Speaking of space shuttles, we have that NASA footage. I gotta say, watching that stuff was pretty mind-blowing. There were plasmoids swarming around this electrified tether during the STS-75 mission, a pulsing thing following the STS-96 discovery. It was like something out of a movie, honestly.
It really is amazing footage, and some of what we see lines up perfectly with the plasma hypothesis. But then there are these moments where the camera cuts out or they put this weird visual noise over it, right when things are getting interesting.
I know, right? Almost like they were trying to hide something. It definitely makes you wonder what they don't want us to see.
It does raise some questions for sure. But even with the cover-up stuff, the footage does suggest these plasmoids are real and maybe way more common than we realize.
So if they're out in space messing with our shuttles, does that mean they come down here too? Could they be behind some of the UAP sightings people report, here on Earth?
That's what a lot of researchers are looking at. And, it turns out the way these plasmoids act could explain a lot of the UAP stories we hear, especially the ones over the ocean.
Right. A lot of the research focused on UAPs near the ocean. And there was that whole thing with the Carnival Imagination cruise ship, remember? Passengers saw UAPs flying around Navy ships, and the Navy themselves said they were being, harassed by these things. So is there some connection between plasmoids and the ocean?
Oh, yeah. There's a very interesting connection. It's highlighted throughout the research.
All right.
Basically, the ocean surface, especially when it's rough, builds up a positive charge.
Okay.
And this positive charge would attract plasmoids if they have a negative or neutral charge. So if they're coming down into the atmosphere, it makes sense that we'd see more UAP activity over the ocean.
Okay, that makes sense. And the research even said that the peak ocean charge is in July, which is also when there are more UAP reports from Navy pilots. The plasmoids have their favorite time to visit, right?
It is an interesting point, and it definitely adds weight to the plasma hypothesis.
Yeah.
It helps explain why so many of these UAP encounters happen over the water. But the research goes even deeper into how these plasmoids might be impacting us in ways we never even thought of.
Yeah, that's what I found so fascinating about this whole deep dive. It's not just about spotting these things in the sky. It's about understanding what they could mean for us, for our tech, even for our minds.
Exactly. And that leads us to some of the more unsettling aspects of this whole plasmoid thing.
Ah.
Yeah, like this whole connection between plasmas and hallucinations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the research suggests that being exposed to certain electromagnetic fields, especially from plasmas, could actually trigger sensory distortions.
Really?
Yeah, even full-blown hallucinations.
Wait, are we talking about, alien abductions now? Because that's where my head goes with hallucinations and UAPs.
Well, not necessarily. We do have to be sensitive with those kinds of accounts.
Yeah.
But the research does kind of suggest that some abduction experiences, especially ones with that feeling of being disoriented, lost time, or weird visuals, it could be tied to plasmas.
Yeah, that makes sense. And some of the examples in the research are kind of creepy, like people seeing things after being near ball lightning,
Mm.
which is basically a plasmoid, right?
Exactly. And remember that pilot, Kenneth Arnold? The guy who came up with flying
Yeah.
saucer? He saw those shape-shifting objects back in 47,
Yeah.
and he actually thought they were like getting into his head somehow.
Oh, that's freaky. And what about that thing in Tom Price, Australia, back in 94?
Right.
Hundreds of people saw this giant ball of plasma, and a lot of them said they felt this strange time-space mind distortion. That's what they called it.
Yeah, that one's really interesting. So many witnesses, and they all described similar, like, disorienting stuff. It seems like plasmas could be messing with our minds in ways we don't even understand yet.
So we've got plasmoids that could be UAPs, maybe even messing with people's heads. But then the research goes even darker, talking about plasmoids causing plane crashes.
Right, that's where this hypothesis stops being just a cool theory and becomes a real safety issue.
Yeah.
Because the research shows plasmas can mess with electronics, and if that happens to a plane, well, it could be really bad.
That's terrifying. And wasn't there that period, like 2013 to 2016, with all those unexplained plane crashes? Didn't that line up with when the Navy pilots were reporting more UATs?
It did, yeah. The research mentions that link. And, just because things happen at the same time doesn't mean one causes the other, but it's definitely something to think about.
It really makes you think about all those unsolved plane disappearances. Could plasmas be the reason for stuff like Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 vanishing?
It's definitely possible, something worth investigating for sure. There's also that case from back in '53, an F-89C Scorpion jet just vanished from radar, seemed to merge with a UFO. It
Wow.
never found any wreckage.
Okay, this is officially getting creepy. So are we saying these plasmoids are, like, evil, out to get us?
I think it's too early to say that. We're still figuring all this out. But the research does make it clear that plasmoids can affect our technology, maybe even our minds.
Yeah, we can't just write them off as harmless lights in the sky anymore. But is there any chance some of these things could be, not natural?
Now that takes us even deeper into this whole UAP mystery. Some research suggests that certain plasmoids, especially the ones doing really complex, almost intelligent stuff, could be artificial.
You mean like made by someone? Like secret government stuff? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, the research does point in that direction. It
Yeah.
talks about this guy, Dr. Alexandru Heening, works at the U.S. Space and Naval Warfare Systems Center. He's been experimenting with making plasmas with lasers.
Right. And he even filed a patent for like using laser-made plasmas to stop heat-seeking missiles. So they're basically making artificial plasmoids for the military.
That's right. And if we can make them do that, who knows what other kinds of plasma tech is out there, maybe even explaining some of the weirder UAP sightings.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder what's going on in those secret labs. But the research goes even further, right? Into the idea that some of these shape-shifting plasmoids could be, well, transdimensional.
Now we're getting into some really mind-bending physics. It brings up that Kaluza-Klein theory, which basically says there's this fifth dimension beyond the four we experience, like space and time.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to follow here. Are we saying these things are crossing over from this fifth dimension into our world?
The theory says that this fifth dimension is kind of curled up inside the four we know, and that under certain conditions, things could move between them.
I see.
And those weird voids or nuclei they've seen in some plasmoids? The research says those could be signs of this interdimensional connection.
Like portals or something.
Yeah, it's a fascinating idea, even if it's just speculation for now. And there are stories of people seeing plasmas with what they call black holes at their center, almost like they were looking into another dimension.
Okay, I need a minute to process all this. We've gone from plasma science to government projects to interdimensional travel in one deep dive.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
What?
But there's one last piece of this puzzle we need to talk about.
All right, my head's still spinning from all this interdimensional stuff, but you said there's one last piece to this puzzle.
Even with all this talk about secret projects and other dimensions, the research actually tries to bring things back down to Earth a bit. It makes the point that, yeah, plasmas could explain a lot of UAP sightings, but not all of them.
Oh, so you're saying there are still some UAPs that even the plasma hypothesis can't explain.
Exactly. And that's where it gets really interesting, because it means there could be other explanations out there, maybe some crazy technology we haven't even dreamed up yet, or things that totally break the rules of how we understand physics, reality even.
So the more we learn, the more questions we have.
Pretty much. But that's how science works, right? It's all about embracing what we don't know and pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible.
Makes you feel kind of small, doesn't it? You think we've got this universe figured out, then something like this comes along and throws everything we thought we knew out the window.
It definitely makes you rethink things. We've gone from saying UAPs are just nonsense to considering them as maybe a new kind of life, super advanced tech, even visitors from other dimensions.
What a wild ride. So after diving into plasmoids, government experiments, and mind-bending physics, what's the bottom line? Do we know what UAPs are now?
I think we have a much better idea, but the mystery is not solved. The plasma hypothesis is a good starting point, but it also creates even more questions and possibilities.
It's like we've traded one mystery for another, but at least it's a more interesting one,
I
right?
think so. And the best part is the search for answers keeps going. Scientists are doing more research, we're getting new data, and this whole UAP thing is finally being talked about more openly.
That's great to hear. So to our listener who sent all this amazing research, thank you. Keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and never lose that sense of wonder.
And remember, this deep dive is just the beginning. There's a whole universe out there waiting to be discovered.